most solar systems that we film out there are binary. They have two suns. So it stands this question that maybe we also have a binary solar system, but our one sun that we now get the heat from is working. The other one is a brown dwarf or a failed sun and is no longer working. And so this model suggests the idea that there's another planet, Nemesis, that's orbiting our failed sun, and that its pass through the Oort cloud dislodges comets and debris, and that cyclically sends things towards us. Now, again, talking about a Nibiru or another planet in our solar system, this too would have effects if there were debris and comets following it. Here's that actual tablet, the flood tablet, stored in the British Museum, that tells how a Sumerian man is chosen by an Anunnaki to build this craft, and it word for word is a rendition of the English version of a Noah's Ark tale, but it's a Sumerian god choosing a man, Utnapishtim, to do this task. And here's another interesting Sumerian tablet where we hear in the English version there were giants upon the earth. Well, here is a Sumerian tablet that you see the Sumerians are standing before one of the Anunnaki and worshiping him, and he's a much larger being. Now, I don't think they were physically larger beings like giants. This is something that's debated. I think they were just more in awe, like, oh, he's, a great reverend being, So we see all these depictions in the Bible, so where are all the Sumerians learning this information and all this information about planets and science? And in the Bible, we just have the term that there's these angels that somehow like float down from heaven, and we don't really know where heaven is. Every culture around the world says, my God didn't come across the lake, he came from the heavens. So the Sumerians give a very interesting piece of information to that tale by saying that their heaven was Nibiru, meaning their gods came from another planet and had a whole bunch of information. Now, in 50 minutes, I can't break it all down for you, but basically some of these pieces are like longevity of life. If you're on a planet that goes around the sun 3,600 of our years, that's still one solar year, a trip around the sun. So let's just say hypothetically Jesus was an Anunnaki, and he came here and said, my people live and prosper. And then he disappears for 3,600 years, goes back on Nibiru, comes back. It's been a year for him. It's been 3,600 years on Earth. So there's a whole idea that if you were to go to Nibiru and live on its planetary life cycles, you'd live a much longer life than you could here on Earth. So there's a lot of these overlaps between the information discussed and what's shown in the actual Sumerian texts and tablets that have been unchanged. Here's another interesting symbolic reference that I show. It's just a simple Anunnaki, one of the rulers of a spaceport is what they were called. And you can see here he's holding up a little thing here, and he's even got an interesting little device on his wrist. Could be symbolized maybe as a watch. He's holding symbolically here the fruit of life and the water of life. Now the little wristwatch, that's just a coincidence. But if we look here at something that is interesting, is that if we look at what the scholars, in the early 1900s, as I said, they were picking out these artifacts and saying, well, what are they doing? Birdmen? This is mythology. We don't understand. Well, look what we're doing today. It's the same thing they were doing then. We didn't land 6,000 years ago, 6,000 years from now. They're not going to look at this and say, what were they doing? Putting birds on the moon? We're using a symbolic reference to say we had the power of flight. And it's the same thing that the Sumerians are doing by depicting beings with wings. They didn't have a technological explanation. They didn't understand, science and mathematics and stuff, so they gave everything a spiritual review. Someone floating down on a conveyance of flight, they'd give him wings. He had the power to fly. So a lot of these correlations start to make sense when we see even in our own modern symbology, like the first landing on the moon, and the terms uttered are, Houston, the eagle has landed. It's the same symbolic references that the Sumerians are describing to say the Anunnaki had the power of flight. So I'll just kind of go through some of these tablets to discuss and show this idea of a winged disc and the reverence for this. There's a man. He's flying some type of a craft. What does this mean? What are they trying to depict? What are they trying to show us? And so a lot of this information when put into a new light to accept the idea that maybe we aren't alone and that there are beings that have visited us really starts to raise the question of, well, all this amassed information of science and knowledge that literally comes right out of the Stone Age the Sumerians possess, it does make sense. If some being more technologically and more spiritually advanced comes here and interacts with us, this is the type of stuff that they're going to be departing. Now, people always ask where are like the spaceships and where are the tools and things, and there's a overall higher topic to describe for the field of ufology and saying why don't we find any of these things, because I'm sure they do exist, but they're quickly snatched up and become classified. So a lot of these things that are in the record of just in the past to look at are there, and you can kind of get a general idea for where we've been in the past and kind of get an idea where we might be going in the future. These are just artifacts. Again, you can see the detail in showing that this is one of the Sumerian gods named Ishtar. She liked to fly the skies of earth. And you can just see the detail that they used in describing and creating some of these patterns for a simple culture. It's just, it's very interesting. So just more cylinder seals kind of showing this symbolic reference for the winged disc and its influences on these various cultures. I like this slide because, again, you see the depiction of an Anunnaki coming down. We're going to kind of wrap this up here. And I think it's interesting here. You can see the people holding up the platform for this to take place. I call these the taxpayers. Sure. So I'm going to just kind of whip through some of these last slides to kind of wrap it up here in my last 10 minutes. Here's just a more drawn back view of that. This is in Iran and Persepolis. And you can see just the detail that was done by these ancient cultures depicting. Now, why would they go through the effort of doing something like this? Just to make a pretty picture on the wall? It's obviously meant something. So for my opinion, I can see that the correlation of all these stories being told of the Anunnaki having the power of flight or them bequeathing knowledge to them, it was very sacred knowledge, and it was handed down by priests, and only certain scribes, Sumerian scribes, could actually write cuneiform script. So having knowledge of the planets and all this information was very sacred and esoteric knowledge that was kept only with the high priests, kind of like today in top secret classified information. So you can just see kind of the various aspects, and just kind of raises the question of, they all came down from the heavens, but where is heaven? Is it possible that there is, other beings in our solar system? And for me, it starts to make sense when we put science, modern science, to look for, using our own astronomical, advances. Let's find the planet out there. If Nibiru does exist, then it's very possible that we do have, ancestors living on that planet. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap it up there. And, I would offer you to go to xfax.com or just Google Jason Martell, and you'll see there's a plethora of information, and you can dive deeply more so in your own time into these topics. Thank you very much.
Sumerian artifacts. And part of it is there's little schools in Santa Barbara. I went there. There's a guy who wrote a book, and he had a little dissertation about exactly what you're doing.
That's cool. Santa Barbara, huh? I'll have to check that out on the way back home.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the library, but it's on one block over States.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Folks, if you'd like, just real quickly while Tom's setting up, I'll just take a couple questions if anyone wants to shoot one at me. All right, good. Looks like everyone's going to talk amongst themselves, and all right, good times.
Okay, we'll be starting again in about 1 minute.
Okay, everybody grab a seat. We'll start in about 30 seconds.
Who was that first guy? He didn't introduce himself.
Okay, ready?
Okay.
Okay, everybody grab a seat, please. All right, ready? Okay, quiet, please. Okay, let's go.
Good morning, everyone. Throughout the history of the solar system, there have been many proposals for additional planets than the ones we know about. And in modern times, there's even a recognition that we don't have a clear definition of a planet. Hence the dispute going on now over whether Pluto should be called a planet or not. Officially, at this moment, subject to revision when they next meet, the IAU says there are only 8 major planets. And Pluto and Eris, which is even larger than Pluto, and Ceres in the main asteroid belt are called dwarf planets now. And there are expected to be many more such discovered. So rather than burden future school children with learning an indefinite number of planet names, there will only be 8 major planets, they say, from now on. But there have been proposals for additional planets, some of which no longer exist, or some of which were hypothetical. Vulcan was the original name given to the hypothetical planet inside Mercury's orbit, turned out not to be there, and the explanation of the anomalies that led people to think it was there were solved by Einstein when he found that there was a natural gravitational effect that perturbed the orbits of the inner planets, especially Mercury. Doppelganger was a hypothetical planet in the same orbit as Earth, but always directly opposite us, so we couldn't see it because it was always hidden behind the sun. Very clever, but in modern times, we could have seen its gravitational perturbations on the other planets, and it wasn't there, and we have had spacecraft go out and look. We'll be concentrating today mainly on discussions of planet V and its moons Mars and Bellona, also called Body C originally, and on planet X, or Nibiru. So without further ado, let me make a few general remarks on that. Planet X comes in three variations in modern times. There are many proposals that have been made over the years. As Jason said, the origin of X is both the unknown and also the Roman numeral for 10. Now, of course, with the new counting system, we're either looking for planet number 12 if you count the dwarf planets, or planet number 9 if you don't. But in the Sumerian, in the Akkadian Seal that Zechariah Sitchin used primarily as the basis for his original proposal, that and a lot of translations of text for which there's no dictionary. The problem with the interpretation that he placed on this interesting-looking seal is that there are too many discrepancies between it and our present solar system. In fact, there's no single unique identifier to which we can hang our hat and say, well, yes, this is clearly a portrayal of a star and planets, and it's our solar system. They're arranged in a circle, whereas the planets are not. There's nothing to correspond with Eris or Pluto. There are no rings or moons to identify Saturn, for example. Its most spectacular feature is its rings. Jupiter has major moons. The relative sizes are wrong, and so on. There's a long list of these things that have been published. And if it is an attempt to portray a real star and planetary system, I'd have to conclude it's most probably somebody else's star and planetary system. If the legends about Nibiru have any factual basis, then they would have to be from another stellar system. There's also a Planet X that's been proposed by psychics, people who are allegedly in touch with extraterrestrials who've given them this information. But there's a common problem both with the psychic Planet X and with Sitchin's Planet X, and that's this 3,600-year orbit that's been proposed. I'd sort of like to give you a flavor of why such an orbit is unstable. You first have to realize that most of the planets move in elliptical orbits, but if you stood back a distance, they're only slightly elliptical. They're very nearly circular orbits. Not so with comets or these hypothetical outer planets, Planet X. The orbits are extremely elongated and pencil thin, and as a result, they're unstable. When Comet Hale-Bopp came into the solar system, just as an example, it didn't pass particularly close to any of the planets, but as it goes by and the planets are in random directions as it moves into the planetary region, it gets a tug first one way from one planet and then another way from another planet and so on. So the orbit is constantly changing. And with a pencil-thin orbit, that has a major effect on the period. So when Comet Hale-Bopp first came in and was discovered, it had an orbital period of 4,200 years. That is, it had been 4,200 years since the last time it came by. But after the planets tugged it this way and that, it rounded the sun and went out on an orbit with a period of 2,400 years. And that was a random change, but by a huge amount. Very often, almost half the time when long period comets come into the planetary region for the first time, their orbital periods are changed so much that they're thrust out into space never to return. So 3,600 years is not a stable period. You might hit that number purely by accident for one trip, but the next time around it's got to be completely different. And so on for the other objections that are summarized on the slide here. Then there's the Astronomer's Planet X. And astronomers, such as my late colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, have long felt that there was something wrong in the outer solar system because when we observe the motions of bodies out there, both planets and spacecraft and comets, there seem to be tugs this way and that can't be explained by the bodies we know about. Well, originally when we began the search for Planet X, we estimated the probability at 80% that the explanation was an undiscovered major planet. I'd have to place that probability today at well below 10%. It's not that we were wrong about the idea, it's just that what we found instead of another planet was two huge new belts of asteroids, which we now think are remnants of planets that exploded, just as the main belt is apparently the remnants in the outer main belt of hypothetical planet K that exploded 250 million years ago, and planet V 65 million years ago. Well, beyond Neptune, there are apparently planets T and planet X, all hypothetical, of course, both of which exploded and left belts of asteroids, which is what we've been finding out there. And very probably, once we get enough data, the perturbations from these asteroids will account for the remaining anomalies. And we think, therefore, that there is no, since there have been many, many searches, we think there's no major planet left to be discovered, that it was there long ago, probably 1 billion years ago, but is now orbiting the sun in pieces that are the asteroids, and former moons like Pluto and Eris, and some of the other larger dwarf planets that are found out there. This leads us to look into the question of how planets form in the first place and how they end. And there's a lot of new evidence lately that it suggests that the end of planets is in the form of explosions. Not the kind we need to worry about. We live on a planet too, and when I say that, there's immediate level of concern. But we're talking about things that occur at hundreds of millions or billions of year intervals. And we knew the Earth wasn't going to last forever, and it probably has a date when its warranty runs out too, but not in the lifetime probably of any of the species currently on the planet and their posterity. But in the standard model, the solar system formed from a large cloud of gas and dust, but there are all kinds of problems with the standard model, and there are many technical papers now discussing these problems. And there's an alternative model which is working much better for us. There you see a brief graphic of the fission model. Any gaseous body such as the sun or even the giant gas planets would, as it spins and contracts under the force of gravity,